Hola guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Roxanne. If it's your first time here, then welcome. We're in a little different area today. I just woke up and felt like filming. I didn't feel like setting really anything up or anything like that. I just wanted to sit and talk to you guys about some books that I read recently. So yeah, there's no real plan. We're just gonna sit here and chat. It's probably gonna be just a really chatty, casual video. So yeah, I have 5 books to talk to you guys about, so let's get started. The first is Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore by Matthew Sullivan. This book is about a woman who works at a bookshop. She's had a very troubled, traumatic past, and she's worked her entire life to try and escape it and to make a life for herself that is outside of all of that trauma, and that essentially just doesn't address it or reflect it in any way possible. So she's been living life just like she wants, and then one day at the bookstore that she works at, she comes across a man who has committed suicide. This man frequented the bookstore every day. There was this like group of guys who just kind of wander through life, and different things have gone wrong, or they're just dedicated the rest of their lives to reading and to being at bookstores. They don't really have to work. It's a diverse little group of men who of all kinds of ages who come to the bookstore very frequently. And so one of the young men that is part of this group is the one that she founds that has committed suicide at the bookstore. So content warning for this book for suicide, very spousal abuse, child endangerment, murder, all of that. You know, so going to this book knowing that if this is a book that you think you would want to read. And so yeah, she finds him in the bookstore and finds herself involved in sort of trying to figure out the mystery of this young man's life, what happened that led him to commit suicide, what was his past like, and in it she's forced to face her own past. And I was enjoying it while I was reading it, and I enjoyed the mystery and all of the levels that it had, but ultimately this book was forgettable for me. Even now I'm sort of trying to struggle to think back on it. I wrote notes down like I always do when I read, and I had to reference them a lot because I had almost forgotten that I had read this book. So it felt very forgettable. It really wasn't anything special in my opinion. For a book that's set in a bookstore and has characters that love reading, it didn't give me the feelings that books that deal with books give me. The writing was just okay, and besides the main character, I felt every other character was very uninteresting and boring. So yeah, I was excited about this one, and unfortunately it just didn't really live up to my expectations. Then I have a nonfiction. It is Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. I was very excited about this book, also a little bit disappointed in it. So this book talks about the Osage Native Americans, everything that they were forced to do by the United States government, that they were forced to move, had to fight for any sort of land and rights. Everything that they had was forcibly taken away from them, as is the case with Native Americans in this country. And it is a heartbreaking story to read everything that they had to go through and everything that this government made them go through. And so finally, when they're finally settled in Oklahoma, I believe, when they're finally settled in Oklahoma, it turns out that the place that they have been given by the United States government is full of oil. So they become very wealthy, and things seem to be going okay despite their horrid history. But it's not. They don't have control over their money or their lives, really. The United States government doesn't deem them as as able, responsible adults who can take care of their own money. So they appoint white male sort of watchers or men who are essentially responsible for these each of these Osage Indians, and everything that they want to buy, they first have to ask permission of this person who is in charge of their estate, and it leads to lots of theft and lots of everybody's taken advantage of. And then there is this horrible plot by these people who have been appointed to take care of the Osage Indians to essentially steal their money through means of death. And it's this horribly complicated situation where literally everybody who's supposed to take care, who's supposed to be friends or be family or be married to these Osage Indians, people who are supposed to be part of the community and who have made themselves off to be these protectors of the Osage Indians, is really just taking advantage of them, and murder runs amok. And it is horrible, tragic story, but it doesn't go far enough. David Grann, I feel, stays very surface level the entire time. His writing is feels very distracted. He will start writing something but then veer off into unrelated things that don't really add to the story. This isn't really a history about the birth of the FBI either. That's very surface level as well. I feel like this book could have been a lot longer, got a lot more in depth. It sort of just feels like, here's what I discovered, and then that's it. It really doesn't go very far into these people. It doesn't go, I feel like I wanted a whole lot more of it than what I got. I feel like there's a lot more about the Osage that we can learn. There's a lot more about the birth of the FBI that we can learn. And he just sort of dipped his toes in, but didn't go as far as I thought this book could go, and I thought this book was going to go. So that was disappointing. But it does teach you yet again how horribly this country has treated Native Americans. And I mean, it is incredibly painful to read and to know that these individuals had absolutely no control over their lives, over their money, over anything. I forget what these people were called. They were guardians. They were like guardians of the Osage. And I mean, that's a book that'll really piss you off. But like I said, I think it could have gone a lot more deeply into the story. And then I read The Good People by Hannah Kent. This is a story about a recent widowed woman named Nora, who is taking care of the son of her daughter who has passed. And the son doesn't speak. He doesn't really do much of anything. And so because he is not developing in the ways that this community has deemed normal development for children, everyone starts to call him a changeling. And you see that the effect that this has on the community. It's a very small, tight-knit community that is very religious. They just have a new preacher who has come in, who is much more radical than their old preacher, who does not believe in anything that could go against the church in any way whatsoever. So he doesn't believe in changelings. He doesn't believe in fairies. He doesn't believe in the good people who are sort of these fairy magical beings that can take your kids and things like that. So he doesn't believe in any of that, and he turns the community against each other and against anyone who sort of thinks in that way. There's this old woman named Nance who is sort of a healer. A lot of the people in the community go to her with their troubles, and she helps them. And so he turns the community against her, and everybody in the community starts to turn against Nora and her child as well. Nora is very, very embarrassed of her grandson, and she tries to hide him. It is really just a tragic story about ignorance, about myth and folklore, about the effects that all of that can have in a small town community full of people who just don't know how to accept that which is different. And I found this story to be fascinating and beautifully written. The nature writing in this, like in Burial Rites, is absolutely gorgeous. This is not really a plot driven story at all. This is a deep it's a deep dive into this small town, very religious, very traditional community, and what the effects of having that mentality can have when you have something like a child with a disability who just does not develop in the way that they deem normal, and they don't understand that, and they fear that, and you see the horrible effects that that has on this community and on this family and on this child. And I found the subject matter to be enthralling, and I was just deeply tied to the story, and I really wanted to know what was going to happen to the young boy, Mikael. And yeah, I mean, it's just a tragic story. If you like slower paced stories that are exploration of character over plot, if you like stories that deal a lot with folklore, then you might like this. Like I said, this is not a story that has a lot of plot. This has a lot of very unlikable characters because everybody in this community, nobody understands this 4-year-old boy. No one knows what's going on, and no one knows what it is to just accept him for who he is and try and make his life as good as it can be. And it is absolutely heartbreaking. And as someone who has a sister with disability and who has had to see sometimes the effects that unaccepting people have on her, this is a story that really sort of meant a lot to me, and it just devastated me. So this, you know, content warning for child abuse. It's just, I really loved it. I thought it was a very powerful story. But I can definitely see how it is not for everybody. Like, it's funny, I kept feeling very hopeful as I was reading this. As I was reading this book, I was like, hopefully they'll learn, hopefully they'll change, hopefully this won't turn out like how I think it's gonna turn out. And it's really something that I should no longer do with Kent, because even though knowing how Burial Rites was going to end, like, I know it is a fictionalized retelling of an actual story, and I think that's actually the case for this one as well. I kept feeling hopeful, and I can't do that with Kent anymore. Might possibly be a controversial one because this book is very beloved, and I don't feel like how the majority of people feel about this book, and it is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This book is the first in a series that she has written about these two young girls named Elena and Lila. And this book is about their childhood, and it goes up until about their maybe like 15, 16, late teens, I think. And it is another story that I don't feel has a lot of plot. It is very character driven. And it is a deep exploration about the friendship between these two young girls and their community. It is set in Naples, and it is also very atmospheric. You feel the small town, rural Naples community in which the story is set. This, again, like The Good People, has very unlikable characters, but I felt very differently about the story than I did The Good People. And I think it might be that maybe the subject matter of The Good People felt more personal to me, and I enjoyed it more. But I just didn't really get along with the story in the way that a lot of people online have. So my friend Sarai did a double review about this and The Good People. Actually, I think we read it at very similar times, which I will link down below because I really enjoyed listening to her thoughts about it. She actually felt the opposite that I do. She liked this one, not so much The Good People as much as she thought she would. But yeah, overall, I didn't engage with the story. I didn't engage with the characters. I read it to just sort of find out what happens, because there's this sense of like suspense the entire time, which I think Marines talks about in her review of this book. There's this sense of, okay, something's gonna happen, something's gonna happen, something's gonna happen, and then you get to the end and really nothing's happened, and you're like, okay, what? So that's how I felt, at least. I didn't engage with the characters. I didn't really care about the characters. I felt like if you remove Leela from this story, then the other characters don't stay sustainable characters, because their entire stories are so wrapped in Leela and in who she is, that I feel like if you remove Leela, these characters don't exist anymore. I don't know that much about Elena besides her relationship with Leela. I don't know much about Elena besides how she sees herself through Leela's eyes and how she's always trying to prove herself to Leela. It does explore what is ultimately a problematic friendship, I felt, and I thought those aspects were interesting. But again, overall, I was just not engaged in the story as much as I thought I was going to be. And yeah, I just felt, like I said, if you remove Leela, I can't really tell you much about these characters. Whereas there's a lot that I found out about the characters in The Good People. Even if you remove the 4-year-old Mikael, there is still a lot of depth there to those characters, I thought. And I didn't really feel that way here. So yeah, overall I was kind of bored by it by the end. And yeah, I don't think I'll be continuing with the story. But don't just go by me. This is a beloved story by many people. So just because I didn't like it, you may still very much enjoy the story. The last book that I read was The Real Boy by Anne Ursu. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was such a cute, charming story that I loved. It's a middle grade story about this young boy who is a page for the local magician, and though never explicitly said, you sort of know that Oscar the boy has autism. You see it in his interactions with people, and I thought that Ursu handled it beautifully with such care and such eloquency. I thought that the story was beautiful. It is about Oscar, who's a page for the local magician. He has a lot of cats as his friends, and he sort of doesn't have a lot of dealings with the people of the community because he's always down in storage helping the magician with his herbs and with his materials. So when something happens to the magician's apprentice and the magician then leaves, Oscar is now left with the responsibility of the magician's shop. And so he's now forced to deal with the community and forced to deal with people who ultimately don't understand him, don't understand why he has difficulty dealing with them, why he can't look them in the eyes, why it's so uncomfortable for him to try and do so. And ultimately, it's a story about learning to be comfortable in yourself, about learning to accept other people just how they are. And I thought that it was a really beautifully written story that deals a lot with magic and with cats and with, just like I said, accepting your friends and those in your community exactly who they are. It's not about trying to change them. It's about changing yourself to be accepting of them and meeting people at the point in which they are at. And it's about friendship, and it's just such a beautiful story. It is. And yeah, it's about Oscar learning what it's like to have to interact with people, to make friends, to stand up for himself, but ultimately to not think that there is something wrong with him, to accept himself exactly in the way that he is. I definitely recommend the story for anybody. It is so well written. It is so beautiful. I loved it, and I definitely recommend it. So those are the books that I have read recently. If you think you would enjoy any of them, let me know. If you've read any of them, let me know what your thoughts are. And yeah, as always, thank you for watching and for listening. I love you guys.